Ruby's out there on the block, chasing down her little dog, calling out but he won't stop, 'cause he's sick of feeling stuck. Can't provide the things she wants, she won't handle when he's gone. He's getting free, he's going long, feeling further as he runs. I hope he does. Neighbors out there in the yard, doing pull-ups on his bar, getting stronger, working hard, gonna have a head start, gonna look just like a star, gonna go out stealing hearts. I hope he falls. I know them, they know me, they're the ones that I see every day, probably. We don't smile, we don't speak. Sammy's out there painting trees, covering up the graffiti, mumbling something through his teeth about the kids out on the street. He won't leave it, let it be. Maybe they'll come back and see. Paint it over permanently. He'll go mad, he'll go crazy. I hope he does. I know them, they know me. They're the ones that I see every day, probably. We don't smile, we don't speak. I know them, they know me. They're the ones that I see every day, probably. We don't smile, we don't speak. Don't smile, don't speak. Don't smile, don't speak. Don't smile.